A portfolio manager compares the performance of a client's portfolio before and after the inclusion of real estate. He has compiled relevant data in a table. He aims to analyze whether the variance of quarterly returns has changed significantly between the two periods. He collects data 5 years before and 5 years after the inclusion. So we have that data down here. Using a 2.1555 rejection point, the manager will most likely conclude that the inclusion of real estate A, significantly alters portfolio performance, B, does not significantly alter portfolio performance, or C, has an indeterminate effect on portfolio performance. So we're going to be needing to do a calculation here, and we're going to be looking at this rejection point to compare that calculation to determine whether we significantly altered the performance. So this will be our F test, which is going to be focused on these variance of returns variables. So we're going to take S1 is giving us under scenario 1 essentially. So we'll take 225, and then under scenario 2 we had 151. So we're just dividing these two numbers, and that gives us 1.49. Since this is below our rejection point, we're going to say that this did not alter portfolio performance. If it was above it, then we would say that this was statistically significant and it did alter performance. Answer B. Bob McAllen, 48 years old, is on the verge of retiring. He owns a savings account amounting to $1.25 million that returns an average of 7% per year. Life expectancy for a 50-year-old man is estimated at 25 more years. Considering that he uses this information alone to plan his retirement, the amount that Mr. McAllen can take out of his account every year in living expenses for the rest of his expected life is closest to. So this is going to be similar to an annuity calculation, and we're going to be using time value of money. Let's pull up our calculator. I've got some numbers in there from last time, but what we're going to do is we've got 25 years to live is what we're expecting. We're going to return 7%. And these are all annual, so we don't need to adjust them for annual or semi-annual. And we have 1.25 million, so that's going to be our present value. Payment is what we're going to be solving for, and we are assuming that we have future value of 0. We're basically going to spend this account down to 0. So with this return and the amount that we have, how much can we spend per year to die at the end of this 25 years with $0? So I think I had begin mode on here from a previous question, so I'm just going to change that back to end mode, and then I'm going to compute my payment, and that's going to give me $100,263 that I can spend for the next 25 years under these return assumptions. Answer C. Which of the following tests is most appropriately used to assess the linear relationship between the ranks of two variables within their sample when the sample data is not normally distributed? So we've got A, parametric tests. Parametric tests are normally going to be used when the data is normally distributed, so I would rule that out right off the bat. And then we've got B, correlation coefficients, or C, Spearman rank correlation tests. So these are both giving us correlation variables in the calculation, but the key here is we're looking at the ranks of two variables, so that's going to align more closely with the Spearman rank correlation tests. The correlation coefficients are going to be based on two variables, but it's not going to be based on the ranking. It's just going to be using the data and determining that relationship from there. Answer C. The standard error of a sample mean is 0.59, the sample size is 30, and the mean is 13.5. If the population follows a normal distribution, the standard deviation of the population is closest to. I'm going to use our standard error formula here. And we're given the standard error, but we need to solve for standard deviation. So we're going to plug in 0.59 for standard error. Our n will be the sample size of 30. The mean is not needed. That's just thrown in there to throw you off. And so we have 30, square root of 30. We're going to bring this over here. So we get x equals 0.59 times the square root of 30, which gives us a standard deviation of 3.2316. And that's going to round closest to answer C. A random sample of 50 CFA exam candidates were found to have an average IQ of 125. The standard deviation among candidates is known, and it's approximately 20. Assuming that IQs follow a normal distribution, carry out a statistical test, 5% significance level, to determine whether the average IQ of CFA candidates is greater than 120. Compute the test statistic and give a conclusion. Use the table below. And we have significance levels, test type, and their critical value. So the critical value is what we're going to be comparing our test statistic to at this 5% significance level. Since we're looking at a test where we're trying to see if we're greater than 120, we're one-sided. We're only looking at one side of this distribution. We just want to know if we're greater than this number or not. If we were doing two-sided, then we would be testing whether this would say something like whether it's not equal to 120. So in that case, you're looking at both sides because you'd be looking at whether it's higher than 120 or lower than 120. In this case, we're only looking for greater than 120. So given that, we're going to be looking at 5% significance, one-sided test. So we'll be comparing our critical value, or we're going to be using this critical value to compare against. So let's pull in that t-stat formula and we can calculate. So our t-stat is going to be the sample stat, which is going to be subtracted from the hypothesis. So the hypothesis is going to be 120. Our sample stat is what we were given of 50 candidates at 125. And then we're going to be dividing that by the standard error of the sample stat. We're not given the standard error, but we can impute that based on the standard deviation, which is given at 20, and the number of candidates, and we'll take the square root of that. So that n right there is going to be plugged in at 50. So our numerator ends up being 125 minus 120, denominator 20 divided by 50 squared, or square root of 50, which is this whole value here. And we work that through, we get 1.7678. And we're comparing that to 1.645. Since this is greater than our critical value, we're going to be able to reject our null. So we've got two parts here. We've got test statistic 1.768. That's good. That's good. And this one's bad. And then we have reject null or fail to reject null. Because we're greater than that critical value, we're going to go with A, reject the null. The use of concentration ratios to estimate whether a potential merger should be blocked due to the potential of increasing monopolistic behavior. A, may overstate the risk if there are low barriers to entry. B, may overstate the risk if the industry is too broadly defined. Or C, may understate the risk if the products are highly differentiated. So if products are highly differentiated, then this would be more likely to overstate the risk. The concentration ratio is essentially telling us how much market share the biggest firms in the industry have. So if the products are highly differentiated, then it may look like these firms have a lot of market share, when in reality they have just different niches within that market, so to speak. So that would be more likely to overstate under that scenario. And B, may overstate the risk if the industry is too broadly defined. This is actually going to be understate. If the risk is, or if the industry is too broadly defined, then there's too many firms that are going to be included in that calculation for the concentration ratio. So this is going to be more likely to understate the risk. If we're too broadly defined, if we bring it in more narrow, then those firms might actually end up having more market share than they might look like under the broad industry. So this one is going to be A, overstate the risk if there are low barriers to entry. Just because firms have a lot of market share now, that would lead to a high concentration ratio and potentially high risk. But if it's an industry where there's a lot of low barriers to entry and new firms can come in and try to make profits, then there is probably more likelihood for disruption and that market share could more easily decrease for those big firms. So it's going to overstate the risk in that scenario. Answer A. An expansionary fiscal policy may most likely include. So expansionary means we're expecting money supply to increase and we're expecting to see something like more fiscal spending or lower taxes, something like that the government is doing in order to increase economic activity. So we've got A, reductions in government expenditures and reductions in taxes. So reductions in taxes would be expansionary. However, B would be contractionary. If the government's spending less money, that's going to be less money flowing through and less money supply. So A could be our answer, but let's see if there's anything better. B, increases in government expenditures. That would be a good thing. Not a good thing necessarily, but it would lead to expansionary fiscal policy. And increases in tax credits would be similar to reducing taxes. That's going to lead to more money in consumers' pockets, and so they're going to have more money to spend, and that's going to be more likely to expand the economy. So I would lean towards B as a better answer over A so far. Let's make sure we can rule out C. Reductions in interest rates, we can rule out right off the bat. This is going to be monetary policy, not fiscal policy, and increases in government expenditures. So C would be expansionary on both fronts as well. However, we rule that out since the first portion would be expansionary monetary policy, not fiscal policy. Answer B. With respect to the impact of fiscal policy on aggregate demand, A, monetarists forecast the effects as powerful. Monetarists, it's right there in the name. They're going to be more focused on monetary policy, and they think monetary policy is going to be more impactful than fiscal. So I think we would rule against this one for now, that they would forecast these effects as powerful. They would more so lean towards monetary policy having a powerful effect. And then we've got B, Keynesians believe that the effect is only temporary. And then for C, we also have Keynesians, so let's read that as well. So we've got C, Keynesians forecast a powerful effect subject to the spare capacity in an economy. This is going to be a better answer than C. And essentially what Keynesians think is right here. So if the economy is not living up to its full potential, essentially, and there is spare capacity in the economy, then yes, throwing more money at the problem or throwing more expansionary fiscal policy will help. However, if there's not spare capacity, then the fiscal policy is not going to help in that scenario. Answer C. Belgium and Germany have a free trade with each other. However, both countries have separate trade barriers on imports from other countries. Belgium and Germany are most likely part of A, a free trade area, B, a common market, or C, an economic union. So the key here that's going to rule out B and C and lead us to A is going to be they have free trade with each other, so that's consistent with free trade area. That's consistent with all three of these so far. However, this second part, both countries have separate trade barriers on imports from other countries. If we were operating under a common market or an economic union, there would be more coordination between these trade barriers. They would likely have the same policies with other bordering countries like France, for example, or Italy. But since they have separate trade barriers with these different, that's indicating that we more so fall under a free trade area or arrangement, not under a common market or economic union. Answer A. When a central bank increases the supply of money and credit in an economy, it is referred to as a contractionary policy, restrictive monetary policy, or C, expansionary monetary policy. If we're increasing supply of money and credit, we are increasing or expanding the economy as well. And so this is going to be C, expansionary monetary policy. A and B are also the same thing. Contractionary policy or restrictive policy would be the same answer, so they can't both be true. Answer C.